Before I started replaying all of the home console Zelda games, there were only 3 I had never completed. Zelda 2 for, I think, obvious reasons, Skyward Sword for, again, pretty obvious reasons, and Twilight Princess because, well, I'm not entirely sure, because having played it again, I've learned that this game is fucking incredible. I started playing completely ready to just shit all over this game, and in the beginning I had no trouble doing just that. Twilight Princess has a notoriously slow start. While it's a little hard to define when the intro truly ends, I'd say it's when you finally return to human form for the first time. That means that before you leave the intro, you have to herd some goats, retrieve and return a cradle in order to get a fishing rod, catch a runaway goat, catch a fish to appease a cat, buy the slingshot, go through the tutorials for both the slingshot and sword, get the lantern, rescue this little idiot, and then herd goats again. Seems like a lot, right? Yeah, that was part 1. After a few cutscenes, you get turned into your Twilight form, Wolf Link, and you have to crawl through the sewers and run across the roof of Hyrule Castle to get to Princess Zelda. And then you have to do a really long series of events that are too uninteresting to talk about here to get the sword and shield. And then you have to meet up with the light spirits and play hide and seek with a bunch of light insects until you finally restore the power of the light spirit and get turned back into human form. Yes, finally, I can have fun. How long did that take? Oh yeah, 2 hours and 15 minutes. The beginning of Twilight Princess is the worst part of the game by far. It drags on, and it's so linear and rigid that it feels more like a chore than a video game. Luckily, after that slog, you go directly into the best part of the game, the dungeons. Twilight Princess has the best dungeons in the series. They're large yet not confusing, full of puzzles that can be challenging yet aren't annoying. This is what I think of when I imagine a Zelda dungeon. They're packed full with content, yet they're easily digestible. I know I'm struggling to articulate exactly why the dungeons in Twilight Princess are so good, but something deep in our gamer brains understands that these dungeons are masterfully designed, and it seems almost every Zelda fan can vouch for their quality. Unfortunately, the scripted events between dungeons can be a little hit or miss. Sometimes you'll be in the middle of a heart-pounding action scene of an intensity found nowhere else in the series, and sometimes you're playing hide and seek again. Still, I'd say Twilight Princess has more highs than lows. Some highlights were everything involving King Bulblin, infiltrating an enemy camp in Gerudo Desert, and sniping a bunch of Bulblin archers in an abandoned Western-style village. All of these moments just make you feel awesome, and they more than make up for the occasional tedium of other events. Beyond required content, there's a lot to do around Twilight Princess's world. While the game is a little light on memorable side quests, the only one I really found interesting was financing Malomart. It is full of unique minigames and a ton of collectibles, like maybe too many collectibles. Throughout the game, you'll be searching for Howling Stones to learn new sword techniques, golden bugs to increase your wallet size and nab some extra cash, and Poe Souls to get... well, I'm not exactly sure because I couldn't be bothered to collect them. Let's talk about the Poes for a second, because these guys are the absolute worst. There's 60 of these things to find all throughout the game world, on the overworld, in secret grottos, in dungeons, and most of them can only be found at night, which might not have been the worst thing in the world if Twilight Princess had any way of changing from day to night other than just waiting around, meaning you'll be doing a whole lot of nothing every time you want to go Poe hunting. It's worth it to get 20 of them to get your hands on a bottle, but that's still a significant undertaking, and getting any more isn't really worth your time. The game also has a ton of heart pieces, the second most in the series in fact, only beaten by Majora's Mask. But in Twilight Princess you need 5 heart pieces to create a new heart container, making each feel less significant. But overall, it's better to have too many collectibles than an empty world, so I can't fault Twilight Princess too much for this. As far as gameplay goes, Twilight Princess is fairly standard. It mostly just refined the gameplay of previous games rather than innovating. However, where Twilight Princess does stand out is in its story and presentation. After the backlash Wind Waker received for taking a more cartoonish, kid-friendly approach, Nintendo made sure to make the next installment serious and mature. In fact, Twilight Princess is the only mainline Zelda game to be rated teen. There's your fun fact for the day. This more serious tone is clearly reflected in the visuals. Whereas Wind Waker was bright, colorful, and fun, Twilight Princess is dark, gray, and I hate to say it, but kind of unpleasant to look at. While I got used to it over the course of the game, the colors are also desaturated and boring. Character models are downright grotesque, and though the textures are very detailed in the HD remake, everything kind of blends together, particularly at night or in dungeons or caves. I can see why this visual style would be used to match the more serious story, but I wish it was just a little more interesting to look at. And then there's the music. Twilight Princess has a lot of songs, and most of them are passable at best. They fit the atmosphere well, but they're not all that memorable. Normally I wouldn't make a point to talk about mediocre music, but this is a Zelda game. Being Zelda music carries a certain prestige, and it's just disappointing that so many songs are so forgettable. Don't get me wrong, there are some great tracks here, but overall I'd still say Twilight Princess has some of the worst music in the series. As far as the story goes, I'm conflicted. It's grand in scale, and for the lack of a better term, epic, yet it can sometimes take itself too seriously, and it has a lot of moving parts that are individually pretty uninteresting. It throws a bunch of shit at you throughout the entire game. So many characters, so much lore, yet none of it really engaged me, and I spent most of the time zoning out during cutscenes and long stretches of expository dialogue. People who love big, complex stories can probably find a lot to like in this game, but I wouldn't really know I wasn't paying attention. What I did pay attention to were the characters, and there are a lot of them, though only a few worth talking about. Midna is my favorite companion in the series. She feels like much more of a character than the fairies or the King of Red Lions, with an actual personality and character arc and everything. Unfortunately, the main antagonist for the majority of the game, Zant, is pretty weak. He doesn't get much screen time, and his presence isn't really felt at all throughout the game world. I spent the majority of the game not even thinking about him. Ganon and Zelda are both weak as well, because Zelda leaves after like 2 cutscenes, and Ganon isn't even mentioned until the end of the game. A lot of the other characters are just kind of annoying. While I can respect what Twilight Princess did with its story, it's definitely not for me. I realize I still spent the entirety of this video just shitting all over this game, but that's really just because everything I like about it can be summed up in just one sentence. It's 3D Zelda at its most refined. Though it has numerous problems, its core gameplay is so incredibly fun that they don't really matter. In terms of gameplay, Twilight Princess is the peak of the traditional 3D Zelda games. It's absolutely worth your time and money, and a great game to add to any Wii U owner's collection. All 12 of you.